Yo, what's happening? This is Miles from Slightly Stupid, and you're listening to Bradley's House Podcast.
Nothing is impossible, but certain things are highly improbable. Don't think I'll meet your kind again, not in this lifetime. That's got some.
Hello, everybody. Come on in, grab a seat, make yourself at home, as you should when you're a guest in Bradley's House, the podcast. I am your co-host, Jarett Orr. She is the executive director of the NowellFamily Foundation, and our host, Ms. Kellie Nowell. Kellie, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Jarett. How are you?
Super good.
Always. Almost
How
always.
could I not be? How could I not be, right? Things are great. We're here
Things
for
are
another
pretty great.
We're here for another awesome episode. Kellie, you never surprise me anymore because I never know what you're going to come up with. You keep finding these amazing guests from all these different walks of life, and I think it really makes for an awesome show and a great opportunity for our listeners to get to meet all sorts of different people from all sorts of different places. So without any further ado, who's our guest in Bradley's House today?
Jarett, today I'm excited to talk with one of the UK's foremost music writers. He's written for Rolling Stone, The Guardian, Mojo, the BBC. He currently writes for The Telegraph and Kerrang. And over the past couple of decades, he's interviewed countless musicians and written several books, including his latest, which will be published next year, called Bodies, Life and Death in the Music Industry. Joining us from the UK, I'm stoked to welcome Ian Winwood to the show. Ian, thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure, everybody. Hello, everybody listening. Thank you for making me your guest.
Absolutely.
What is this evening in London?
That's right. It is evening for you. It's afternoon for me. We're all spread out across the globe here. But I had the pleasure of talking with you a few weeks ago when
That's
you were finishing up your book. And it just occurred to me that with all of the experiences that you've had, and everything that you've done, that it would just be such a natural fit. When did you start writing in the music industry?
I started writing in the music industry, Kellie, when it will be 30 years ago next year. I was 20 years old, and I had finished, I can tell you a very quick story if you like.
Mm-hmm.
I had finished my a journalism course in the north of England, which is where I am from, which was useless in every way save for one, which is it gave me the confidence to come to London and chance my arm. Since then, no one has ever asked me if I have a journalist qualification or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that without it, I could have done this, but I didn't know this at the time. And I came to London and I read and I wanted to write for Kerrang. It took me a good sort of 8 years to get to Kerrang.
Wow.
But I was reading in Kerrang that I didn't know anyone in publishing or in the music industry. I didn't know how I was going to orchestrate this idea of mine to break in. And I read in a copy of Kerrang. It was a really cold January day, and for some reason I was at Paddington train station. If anybody knows the Bear, that's where Paddington got his name.
Mm-hmm.
And I was reading Kerrang at a newsstand, and it said an American metal band who are called Exodus. And Kirk Hammett from Metallica was Exodus's original guitarist. And Gary Holt played with Slayer in the final years of that band's existence anyway. And they were in town recording an album on a major label, and it gave the name of the studio. And I don't know how, because there was no internet, but I found out where the studio was. And one morning, it was a Monday morning, and I went to the studio at 9 o'clock. And I went into reception and I said, look, I'm trying to break into music journalism. Do you think the band will give me an interview? Are they here? And I learned a very important lesson that day, which is that people in the music industry don't start work at 9 o'clock in the morning. So I went and had a little bit of breakfast and came back an hour or two later. And very graciously, in what today strikes me as something close to altruism, because I couldn't do anything to help them. They get two members of the band gave me an hour of their time, and I went back to the place that I was living, and I typed up on a typewriter, not a computer, typed up
Wow.
this interview, and then the next day hand delivered it around to all the magazines in London. I can't imagine that I would ever be that proactive again.
Hmm.
And by the end of the week, I'd got offers of work from two magazines. So
Wow.
that's how it started.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Good for you. That shows some real initiative. That's what it takes. That's for sure.
It's like looking back on a stranger, to be honest with you, but that is indeed what I did.
That is phenomenal. Actually, our wonderful producer Anna is a huge fan of Exodus.
Oh, right, well, there you go. I did actually remind Gary Holt of this. I mean, decades later, and he had no memory of it, but it meant and indeed means a lot to me.
Absolutely. So, who are some of the artists that you've interviewed over the years?
Oh gosh, I mean, when people ordinarily ask me that outside of the music industry, of course, I defer to the most famous names. So I guess to start with those, it would be. I mean, I tend to concentrate on rock music, although at the Telegraph, where I've been writing for coming up a couple of years now, they don't really care that I've sort of made my name in the rock press. They'll just let me
Mm,
write about anything. So for them,
nice.
it can be I interviewed James Taylor quite recently,
Oh, wow.
and people like Billy Bragg. And
Hmm.
Paul Heaton, who you perhaps don't know in the United States, but it's got quite a very noted singer-songwriter over here.
Mm,
But in terms of what for the longest time was my beat, groups such as Metallica and Muse and the Foo Fighters quite a number of times. The White Stripes, Arctic Monkeys, Kings of Leon, the Beastie Boys, Green Day, Red Hot Chili Peppers, and then sort of the great punk bands such as Bad Religion in an enormous number of times. I mean, gosh, there's. I mean, in terms of music with music that is played loud, the thing about
mm,
Kerrang, for anyone that doesn't know it, um, as a weekly publication, it was always the one that I wanted to write for, and I wanted to do it from when I first discovered the magazine when I was 14.
mm.
The title of the magazine is an onomatopoeia, by which I mean it's a word that denotes what it describes.
Right.
So Kerrang is the sound of a guitar struck with force. So it's
Mm,
not a metal magazine, although it covers that. It's not a punk magazine, although it covers that. It's just a magazine about loud music. So if we're sort of talking about bands who make loud and forceful music, I hope I don't. I'm not meaning to sound conceited here. It's possibly easier to ask me who I haven't at that point.
wow.
No, that sounds terribly conceited, and I'm honestly not.
No, that's
I'm
wonderful.
not meaning to, Kelly. I promise you.
Well, you've had an amazing career. There's nothing to be ashamed of.
Yeah, I'd be bragging too.
Yeah.
Don't feel bad. Let me ask you: have you ever interviewed Graham Bonnet from the band Alcatraz or
Yeah.
Rainbow?
Do you know what? Funnily enough, I have, and quite recently too. And the reason that I did that, Jarrett, I mean, I thought he's going to get me. He's going to say a name that I've never interviewed. And in fact, I have. I wrote a piece last summer. We have a festival over here. It's called Download, and originally the festival was called the Monsters of Rock Festival, and it's held at what is it? A sort of a racetrack in the East Midlands. Your listeners don't need to know all that stuff. Anyway, and it was the one at the time. It was a hard rock metal festival, and the first one was 40 years ago last summer. And
Oh,
and it was headlined by Rainbow, and Judas Priest were on the bill, and Saxon, I think Anvil. No, anyway, some other bands too. April Wine, I think, were on the bill. And I wrote a piece about that, and Graham Bonnet was one of the people I spoke to for that.
Well, our lovely producer, Anna, is a
Yeah.
huge Graham Bonnet fan, to the fact that she has Graham Bonnet tattooed on her body. Um,
Wow.
yeah, she has a Graham Bonnet portrait, and I reached out to his manager. I guess it was about 2 years ago now at this point,
Hmm.
and said, "Hey, there's this really hot young girl that would like to have an autograph of Graham, and he's actually tattooed on her body." And they were like, "Yeah, right, prove it." And I sent the picture over, and they were like, "What address do you want the autograph sent to?"
Very
And they sure enough sent one. So
That's cool.
that will be added to her tattoo. So I really had to ask that question for her benefit, because she's like his biggest fan, and I figured you had to have spoken to him at some point.
He was a good-looking lad. There's no doubt about that.
Do you have any favorite interviews that you've done?
Um, Gosh, that's such. I mean, there are many favorite moments. I mean, I've been. I mean, one of the things, Kelly, is that I mean, I was thinking about an interview I did. I was thinking the other day about an interview I did perhaps 2 years ago, and I couldn't actually remember. I remembered where I'd done it, but I couldn't remember who it was with because the band sort of came and went a little bit. So there's a lot of those kind of interviews where, and I suppose this is one of the things with mental health in the music industry, is that people invest all their hopes and energies in it, and they don't tend to have a plan B. And in 2 years it's gone, it just doesn't work out. So those always tend to stay with me, even if in this instance I couldn't remember who's with. But
Right.
the bands who sort of have made it. I remember once I was interviewing the Beastie Boys in New York, and they'd been away for years, and just sort of to get things rolling, I politely asked them to account for their absence, and they said, "Oh, we were kidnapped by Sasquatch." I didn't know what Sasquatch was. That's not a word we use here. So we would call it Bigfoot. And I said, "Oh, I said, really? Okay. And what did you learn in that time?" And they said, "Oh, he taught us to dance." And I said, and we're in a really small sort of office in like a Chelsea brownstone in New York. And I said, he said, "Oh, they taught us to dance." He taught us to dance, and I said, "Okay, show me." And Adam Horowitz didn't do it, but Mike D and MCA, Adam Yauch,
Uh-huh.
Michael Diamond did, and they got. And I'm an enormous Beastie Boys fan. I've called many things wrong over the years, but I bought Paul's Boutique on the day it came out.
Oh,
My allegiance is legit. I never lost faith.
I
And
was literally just listening to the License to Ill album this morning. That's so
so they,
funny.
so they stood up. So it's kind of like in the Intergalactic video. They were kind of just like not quite body popping, but they're going. You can't see me, but my hands are kind of protruding forward, and I'm sort there thinking the Beastie Boys are dancing for me, you know. So, so I mean, if I had to pick a moment, that would be it. And there was, I suppose, one for which I became briefly known, certainly in music journalist circles. After a bad experience with Chad Kroger from Nickelback, who's just, I mean, it's just not good music, and I don't think that it's just not what I like, and I can make a
Mhm.
case as to why that is. But I had a bad experience with him in Philadelphia, and I, I mean, how much of this story to tell you? I just don't want to bore your listeners. But at the start, so after this bad experience, they were on a bill. It was one of those, you have these in the United States. It was a Christmas time concert for a local radio station, which raised funds for local charities. And the bill was Blink 182 were headlining, Bush were playing, Nickelback were playing, someone else, Late were playing. I'm forgetting one of the bands, but Nickelback were second from the bottom of the bill because they were just sort of breaking, but they were breaking, and And the PA announcer said that they'd be on in 5 minutes, and most of the crowd cheered, but you could hear an undercurrent of booing in the crowd.
Mm.
And when the band started, there was a kid toward the front of the stage who was just flipping the bird with both fingers to Chad Kroeger, rather than putting them in his ears, which is what I would have done. And he at the end of the song, Kroeger insisted that this kid was removed, was thrown out, and I just couldn't believe that he'd sort of done that he couldn't take this on the chin.
Wow.
So when I wrote up the story, I can't say this word. Let's just say it is a word that North Americans very rarely say, but is banded around in the UK quite a lot. And
You can say anything on here.
it begins with C. Okay?
I'm sure there's 4 letters in it also. You can say cunt. Go ahead, Ian.
It's universally regarded as being the worst swear word in the lexicon. And
Kind of why I enjoy it.
I just didn't think that Kerrang would print this. I just did it because I thought, well, this is how I'd like to write it. And they just stuck it straight in print. And then when the band were coming to, this is how long ago this was, the band were coming to the UK to record, to do a tour of arenas, or an arena tour, and they what used to happen is that record companies would put out a single to precede the tour, and they did, and I was reviewing the singles that way. So just for fun, I did it again, and they'd already sent me sort of bouquets of lilies, which are funeral flowers anyway.
Oh God!
So when the band came to town, I actually went to a soccer match that night, or for a football match for anyone listening in Europe. And I woke up the next morning. This was before everybody had had mobile phones, but you couldn't get internet on them. And people didn't check them. Or certainly I didn't check my email all the time. And I woke up in the morning to this avalanche of emails saying, "Oh my God, are you going to do it? Are you going to do it?" And I was like, "Well, to do what?" And they said, "Oh, Chad Kroeger challenged you, but to last night from the stage by name to a fight." And so I said, "Oh, I can't say no." And I went into the Kerrang office, and they were singing the Rocky theme at me, and I remember the news editor had been on the phone to the British Boxing Council to find out what to do to stage a fight. And for anybody that's interested, you only need a doctor. You don't even need a license. And it's like, oh God, I'm going to get killed. And but nothing came of it. Nothing came of it.
Oh,
so
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at all that nothing came of it. I think you would have stood tall. Don't cut yourself short.
Jarett, I'm not tall. I'm literally all figure. I mean, I've got a big gob, as you can hear, but I'm not a tall person. But I was thinking, if I just got one lucky punch in, and that's a humiliation he would never ever recover from. So nothing came of it. So those two, along with 100 others, those two. But I tend to. I mean, I do have in answer to your question, I do have something approaching a photographic memory, and there are just so many, even the most routine interviews, I learn something about this strange world of the professional musician.
Yeah.
And so taken together. When I was first starting out, one of my first interviews was with Lane Staley from Alice in Chains. He was the first in the book that I'm writing. I put this in. He was the first obviously damaged person that I ever met, and then shortly after that, I mean, certainly the same year, if not just a couple of months afterward. I interviewed the band, aren't necessarily very popular in North America, but over here they are a band called the Manic Street Preachers, and I interviewed their guitarist, and a couple of years after that he just disappeared without trace. Now, quite recently, somewhat recently, the family changed his official search status from missing person to dead. But in about I think about 1995 or 1996, he just disappeared, and no one ever knew where he were, never knew where he went or where he was. So I think quite early, even though I didn't necessarily fact, I didn't piece it together for the longest time. Suddenly, I was in the company of people whose experiences were markedly different, certainly from the norm. If these kind of things were going on with your friends and you didn't work in the music industry, particularly the music industry, I think you would attempt to help them, or at the very least be aware that this was wrong. What was happening was bad for them.
Right, some red flags.
Whereas in the music industry, and this is one of the things I've been writing about, in the music industry, certainly traditionally, perhaps things are changing somewhat. Not only does it seem to be priced in to the cost of doing business, but it's actually a selling point,
Mm.
And I've written, oh gosh, hundreds of stories about people that are in some way or another mentally unwell, addicted to something, and of course there's a giant Venn diagram overlap there.
Mm-hmm.
I will defend these pieces because when you put them together, they're as tall as I am. But I will defend the tone of these pieces, but I can't deny their existence. It's marbled through the music industry. So, I do tend to remember those things.
When you and I spoke for your book,
Yeah.
we spoke extensively about what you were just saying about how these things are tolerated and even celebrated in the music industry that normally would be addressed in a very different way if someone were not an artist. And what was it that made you decide to write a book about this? Like, I mean, obviously you've seen so much of it, but was there ever a moment where you just finally went, I need to speak up about this, or I need to do something?
Well, I think what happened was, I wrote a book a couple of years ago, which was my first ever idea for a book, which was a book about the great success of the Californian punk bands, which remarkably somehow manages to omit Sublime, and I don't quite know how I managed that. So I have to accept my apologies for that, and
All good.
perhaps you will call me to account for that. And I was sort of scrabbling around for something else to write about in book form.
Mm.
Now, I won't tell you the exact details, only because it's a bit of a spoiler for the book.
Mm.
But for the longest time in the music industry, I was given cover to behave, let's generously describe it, foolishly.
Mm.
I was never addicted to anything, but I'd fallen into habits. If you understand,
Sure.
appreciate the distinction.
Of course.
And then, actually, 10 years ago this month, my father died.
Sorry.
It's okay, in startling and alarming circumstances, and so that was one thing. And I found his body, and so that was one thing.
Oh.
But another thing was that I got half of his estate, which wasn't a life-changing amount of money. I couldn't have bought a house in London with it or anything like that. But it was certainly enough to be very, very foolish.
Mm.
And I just sort of went completely off the rails, and not in a celebratory way. This really wasn't fun. It was just a pursuit of extremes, and I can be quite an extreme person. When I go running, I tend to go running for a couple of hours, and so I do definitely have that within me.
Mm-hmm.
And I just had the money to just take drugs, cocaine, and drink. And the only reason I really drank was to come down from the cocaine.
Mm.
But it was really bad, and I was in and out of hospital, and I honestly think that had I taken it any further, I was placing my life in danger. There's no
Right.
question. There's no question about that. And I was in the arms of the mental health services, and it was just crazy. And then I sort of, I, it seems a bit glib to say that I got over it, that I snapped out of it. But I definitely reached a point where I thought, something within me thought, it's time to stop this now. And
Mm-hmm.
although the road back into the light, it wasn't a perfectly smooth gradient up toward the light. The frequency of the episodes the episodes became less dramatic gradually over time, and the distance between them became longer and longer
Mm-hmm.
until now it's been a couple of years. So that's over
Good.
maybe 18 months. So that's obviously good. So I'm thinking as a forgive me if I'm taking a long time to answer
No,
this
this is
question.
great.
Well, and so I was thinking about. I'm very suspicious of aging music journalists um, who just leap from one book to another. And when I wrote
Right.
the comic book, one of the things I liked about it is that it told an interconnecting story and flipped through times and things like that. And I thought, well, I don't just want to write a book about, seek out a band and think, well, I'll write a book about them. So,
Mm-hmm.
what's a good story? What's a good story? And sort of much later than it might have done, it occurred to me that perhaps this was the foundations for a good story.
Mm.
And as I thought about it, I thought that the experiences of other people within the industry, the fact that it was only when things became too bad to ignore for me did I ever, and I didn't even lose writing gigs. I was just sort of placed on sabbatical as people worried about me.
Mm.
Um, and I just thought, well, why do so many? I mean, I was ill in the music industry. I don't think the music industry made me ill because I live at home. I don't. But I think that there's something about the structure of the music industry, uh, and I've firmed these thoughts up in the course of writing the book. I'm presently just combing through each chapter now to tighten it up as best I can. And I thought, well, and I'd come to view all of these stories, whether it be Lane Staley or whether it be Brett Gurevitz, who was addicted to crack and heroin, or whether it be, oh gosh, there's just so many people. Almost all of the stories I write, if they're not about someone, and they're not written for this reason, but as part of the story, there's someone in the band or someone in a band that they toured with were leading or had led terribly dysfunctional lives, and
Right.
I sort of regarded these as being separate incidents. Obviously, I knew that they were common, but I didn't necessarily connect them into this tapestry, and that's sort of what has come about in the course of writing the book.
Why do you think that I'm not sure exactly how to phrase this. Obviously, it's an issue not just in the music industry, but pretty much all across the entertainment industry in general. I mean, we see a lot of the same behaviors with, actors and artists, really of all types.
Hmm.
Why do you think that it is so tolerated or so ignored or glossed over? Is it just because of the money involved?
In the music industry,
Yeah, in any industry.
uh, well, I think the music. I mean, I would think I don't. I mean, I don't really have the the background in psychology to answer this with any. It's only a hunch, is what I'm saying.
Hmm.
I think that the arts tend to attract people perhaps who are wired slightly differently,
Hmm.
and their motivations are slightly different. Uh, Creativity and vulnerability are not necessarily always too far removed from one another.
Right.
Uh, it can be a very distorting lens, but I think as it relates to music, I think music is particularly problematic. I think that we can see that, if when Heath Ledger died, and when Philip Seymour Hoffman died, both drug-related deaths, that was an absolute unabated tragedy. No one
Right.
there was nothing cool about that.
Right.
Although that these tragedies happen in the music industry, there is something that makes us celebrate these, and I think that one of these things is, I think one of these things is that there is this feeling of a particular outlaw spirit in music, the sort of traveling musician that's sort of slightly outside of the law. And also there has been a culture of bands monetizing this. I don't necessarily mean cynically, but nonetheless, Motley Crue would be the example that I always fall back on. Motley Crue are now, I would say, Motley Crue were about to do a tour and will do so again when your country opens up.
Mm-hmm.
Of stadiums. It's a stadium tour. It's co-headline with Def Leppard, but Motley Crue are the closing act. Motley Crue never played stadiums. Motley Crue are an arena band. They haven't released new music. What they have done is they've had the Netflix movie with The Dirt. They've had the Heroin Diaries by Nikki Sixx. So it's sort of, it hasn't always been a hidden secret in rock and roll. I think particularly one of the reasons that musicians fall prey to this, and this is something that occurred to me as I was writing this book, is sort of they sign contracts when they're very, very young, ordinarily. And they are sort of, certainly with the business as it is at the moment, they're sort of reduced to a state of servitude almost. And with that servitude is a sense of gratitude that they are even allowed to do this.
Right.
I mean, I was speaking to a band in Britain who have a top 5 LP. Their name is Creeper, and would have made and on a major label, and they would have made inroads. And they earn so little money from their recorded output that they are, in order to earn a living, they are required to be on the road for longer than it is healthy. And I think
Right.
that is the place at which if one doesn't have a really, really strong sense of yourself, because everything out there, for anyone that's ever joined a band on the road, the thing that always strikes me is that everything on the road is extreme. I might have said this in our phone conversation, Kelly. The gigs are extreme, whether it's to 20,000 people or you trying to make it work in front of 12 people in a bar.
Right.
And the vast empty spaces of boredom, the boredom is extreme. You can't go home.
Mm-hmm.
You're always around people. It's just a really, really weird environment. And in the course of writing this book, I have racked my brains trying to think of another place of work where you go there, as you will, your dressing room. Your dressing room is your place of work, and the promoter will have given you literally cases of beer, a
Right.
couple of, if you're headlining, a 1,000 capacity room, you have enough power to have on your rider 3 cases of beer, 2 bottles of spirits, and you'll get the same again the next night as well. It's just, behavior that is not normal is normalized
Right.
in the music industry. And I think that is why its practitioners, young people, are easy prey to illness.
Absolutely. Now, you've toured with some different artists before in the past, right?
When you say tour, I've joined them on the road for a couple of dates.
Mm-hmm. Who are some of those artists?
That I've sort of I've sort of hopped in and out when they're on tour. So Green Day. I've actually been on tour with Frank Turner, sorry, you and I were talking about Frank Turner in our interview, Kelly.
Yes.
I actually was on tour with him because I was interviewing him on stage. A couple of dates, a really, really fabulous band, arena band here in the UK called Biffy Clyro, which is not a good name for a band, but they are just the most superb band. Um,
Wow.
yeah, as they were coming up, a couple of dates with them, my mind's somewhat going blank. And if not, it's only ever for a couple of dates. But
Yeah.
the you know, the number of times that I have been with the band, on a date on their tour in various places in the world.
Sure.
Metallica in Dallas, I did once. Gosh, so many. That you'd say, as soon as we finished talking, a million
They'll all pop in your head, yeah.
are going
But
to
it's
pop.
given you the opportunity, of course, to witness firsthand how
Yeah,
all of that, behind the scenes goes, and the boredom, as you were mentioning, and finding ways to fill your time until they're set and that kind of thing.
yeah.
It can be very destructive. And I like the way you said it. If you don't have a strong sense of who you are, I can imagine that it becomes very difficult.
And
I know
and
from
who among us, has a strong sense of who we.
right,
And of course, not everyone in a band is, young. Not everyone is 22 years old, but they will have learned those lessons at that age.
mm,
So and then they have to figure out a way to make it work. So if you're at a high level, then you can hop aboard a private jet, which is what Metallica do, or Green Day have separate tour buses. You find a way to make it work. Frank Turner, it's something as simple as he has an hour in each day during which he reads a book and no one can disturb him.
mm,
These things that keep you grounded. But it's just a terribly, terribly confusing. What job of work? I spoke to a psychologist, a clinical psychologist therapist who works in the music industry. And my fiance, when we first started going together, had never seen an arena show, which was an enormous shock to me. I mean, I just imagined she was an Amish or something, because who hasn't seen an arena show? So I took her to see Def Leppard because I thought, well, they're going to do it as well as anyone to
sure,
introduce her to the big full whistles and bells production. And now it's interesting because Joe Elliott, who I've spoken to a number of times, who's the band's singer, seems to me about as unaffected by what was truly and is truly international success as
yes,
anyone that I have ever met. But in the same band, they had Steve Clark, who drank and drugged himself to death. So
mm,
it can cast its shadow unevenly among people. And I remember watching Joe Elliott. We call them ego ramps, the sort of ramps that lead out into the crowd from the
mm-hmm,
stage. And he
right,
walked along the ego ramp and he sort of had his arms in the air. And the whole place is 20,000 people. It's at the O2 Arena here in London. Are going mad. They're going crazy.
wow,
And these are adult people. These are, people, certainly a lot of them are in their middle years. And some of them are their children. But,
mm,
and my fiance said to me, "Gosh, how do they come down after that?" And that is a good question. Whose job
right,
is at 11 o'clock at night with a room full of people shouting at you?
right,
So even that is strange. And anyway, I spoke to this clinical psychologist and who works in the music industry. Thinking of Joe Elliott, I said to her, "Well, of course not everyone. I didn't want to appear to be sort of over amplifying or oversimplifying or painting too sort of binary a picture." And I said, of course, well, not of course not everyone. Uh, Most people don't have problems with the industry. It's just some people just it's just like a normal job. And she said, and I remember this, and I put this in the book. She said, "Well, actually, no, I don't think that's true. I think everyone suffers to some degree or another." And this is, and some of them don't yet know it, but they
mm,
all are vulnerable to the strangeness of the music industry.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because from the outside looking in, it's easy to think that, you know, their lives are perfect, they've got all these wonderful things, but I do think that it's hard sometimes to understand the struggles of that lifestyle as
Right.
well. And what do you think is the answer? I mean, what's the solution? What can be done?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure that there is a solution as such, because for as long as there has been rock and roll music, there has been um, illness and excess,
Mm,
and we only have to look back to Alice Cooper at the start of the '70s, and he had this drinking club called the Hollywood Vampires, and
mm,
Keith Moon would show up, and Harry Nilsson, and the bassist from Fleetwood Mac. He's escaped my mind. John Lennon would sometimes show up, and I think Jim Morrison did every now and again, and they just get blasted, and they were called the Hollywood Vampires because no one ever saw them during daylight. And
yeah,
there are a thousand stories, from the 20th century. So I don't think there ever was an age of wellness. But I think that the state of penury that musicians are in, with regard to the business model at the moment, I think is unacceptable. It seems to me, Kelly, to be intellectually unsustainable, and morally unsustainable, actually, that when the music industry is shut down by a pandemic, the musicians themselves are the only ones that are going broke. That just
mm,
seems to me to be morally wrong. It seems to be an
right,
appalling state of affairs. Um, so I think that the very least you could do is uh, pay them fairly for their streaming royalties, uh,
right,
give them a fighting chance, so that the ones who don't, so people aren't forced onto the road all of the time as the only way of making money. Merchandise sales and ticket sales are the only things on which a musician, a band, can guarantee that is theirs.
right.
Um, so I think that would be a start to give them a shot. That if they are a successful band, or they become a relatively successful band, that they can make a living. Like, this is an English group, but Talk Talk were a really good example of
Right.
that in the '80s and '90s. They became a studio band. A band that would never happen now, because you just can't make any money of it. So pay them properly, and so that, in terms of the corporate, the balance sheet, the corporate structure, these people are not on their knees, because I think that state of servitude and sort of gratitude that they tend to adopt. They don't like to talk about having problems, because they're also grateful that they'll be doing this, and this gratitude is misplaced. It's because they're, like I said, they're in a state of servitude, and
Right.
they're not expressing what it is that is ailing them, because they think that they shouldn't be complaining about this stuff.
Mm,
But not only are these complaints are wholly valid, they're being exploited, and I think that on top of the things that we've already discussed, that were already, I think, part of the music industry, and I think always will be, to be honest with you, this whole new culture of ripping people off is a whole new level of trouble for musicians.
right. Indeed. Oh, that's good insight. So, what do you hope to accomplish with your book? Like, what was the whole impetus for writing it? The message that you're hoping to get across?
Oh, I mean, that's really very easy to answer, Kelly. All I wanted to do was write a good book. Uh, I mean, books change shape somewhat as you write them, and
Sure.
I noticed I've spent the last couple of weeks going through the first half of the book, which I thought was almost there, and discovered that it's actually not anywhere near as good as the second half, which is
Mm,
good, because it means that the book got stronger as I went along, and I sort of
right.
figured it out. Um, So I've spent a couple of weeks bringing the first half up to code. Just before I came on the line with you, I started reading the first chapter of the second half, and that's as I want it to be. So that's a relief that I don't have to do it with the whole book. I just want to. Well, I mean, that's a good question. Primarily, I wanted to write the best book that I could. I don't think there's any point in being a writer, especially a writer that has the freedom to write a book, to write anything other than the book that I want to write.
Mm-hmm.
So that is really all that I am concerned with, to be honest with you. You know, and a great number. So what it does, it tells my own story and it interweaves it with the story of others. You know, people spoke to me about, you know, the culture of sexual, not just sexual harassment, but sexual trespass in the music industry, which is, of course, something that I have no claim to understand. So really, I have a responsibility to write in good faith about the people that have taken the time to talk to me. What I also have to do, I don't think that the one thing in this whole discussion that is indubitably a good thing for the people that make it and for the people that listen to it is the music itself. And I didn't want it to be a cynical book. I wanted it to be a precise book that didn't seek to denigrate music, because without it I don't know where I would be. You know, I listened to Frank Turner's appearance on Bradley's House, and he said the same. You know, so I wanted to keep the music special, but I wanted to write about as wisely and as forcefully. I think I find that this industry is broken, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does that make any kind of sense? I'm not sure that was a clear answer, Kelly, but
No, it definitely does. I think I really am excited about the opportunity to just get the conversation going about, you know, mental health and addiction and, you know, a lot of the pitfalls that people face in the music industry, having seen firsthand what my brother went through.
right.
And hopefully by you writing your book and us talking about it on the podcast and so many other people, we're all sort of joining this global conversation and helping people to understand a little bit more about it. And then hopefully that will pour over into other areas, not just the music industry as well. But, you know, as we can understand the problem as it relates to this industry,
Sure.
then I think it will give us a bit more compassion and understanding for everyone in general who struggles with mental health and addiction. And, you know, we all have things that we struggle with. And so I think it's important to talk about these things. And so that's one reason I'm very excited to read your book. And I think it will do a lot to shed some light on that, you know, being that you have such a unique perspective.
Well, I hope so. May I ask you a question, Kelly?
Sure.
You,
Ever the journalist.
you have some great insight in this. If it's not an impertinent or inappropriate question, if Sublime were emerging today, do you think that Bradley would be safer than he was, you know, in the early to middle years of the 90s?
I don't necessarily think so, no.
Right.
Because I think the problem is universal. I think definitely the way that we approach it and the way that we view it is changing, and that's a good thing. But the problems are still there.
Right.
And, you know, there's always going to be ways to hide it. There's always going to be ways to cope with it in an unhealthy manner. But I do think that as we become more comfortable talking about it, that it gives people the opportunity to get the help that they need. So I don't necessarily think that he would have been any safer from his struggles with, you know, addiction and all the other things. But I do think that maybe it would have been easier for him to get the help, right, if that makes any sense.
It's interesting because I thought that I would conclude my book by saying things are getting better now on a practical level. And you're right, of course, organisations such as your own. I spoke to an organisation, two organisations actually, that seek to help musicians in the UK. So you're right about it bringing it into the light. I think that because it is no longer. I think the mistake that I'd made is that I thought that because it is no longer kind of a selling point anymore. You know, again, I keep going back to them. This
Right.
crewization of the culture. That the culture didn't exist. What I had discovered. And I picked two young bands at random, and what I discovered from them, and from some research that an academic friend of mine was kind enough to send over to me, was that these problems are just as entrenched as ever. They've kind of gone underground a little bit, which I think that's particularly troubling. I know you spoke to me, Kelly, in a conversation that you and I had about sort of functioning adults, and you'd said that was, you know, kind of even more scary.
Right.
So I think that you're right. If there is places that people can get help, and more power to their elbow, and more power to your elbow. But I think that I'm much more pessimistic having written the book than I was, you know, as when it existed only in my head.
Yeah. Well, I think the bottom line is that the problem is never going to go away, but we can make the solution more accessible.
Right.
You know, there's never going to be a time when people are not suffering from mental health or addiction.
No.
But there can be ways for them to get the help that they need. And really, it's just like any other disease. You know, there was a time when, in the 80s, when AIDS was pretty much a death sentence, you know, whereas now people can get the help that they need and can live with it and can live long, happy lives. And, you know, same with certain types of cancer or diabetes, or like all these different things that people are able to get help because they can have early detection and have easier access to therapies and that kind of thing. And I think it's the same with this. If we can make it easier for people to get the help that they need, make it more comfortable, make it, you know, just so much less of a stigma, that then we can address the problems that are always going to exist in a much healthier way.
I think you're right. I also think it's right not to cast darkness on this too much, Kelly. I also think it's right that there are people in the music industry who would not be mentally unwell if they weren't in the music industry, and I think that is an enormous problem.
That is a good point. Very true. And perhaps that's something that can change in the future.
I would hope so.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, exactly. I think that would go a long way. It really would. And that's a tough position. It's either feast or famine in that industry. You know, there's very little in between. But thank you so much for your time, Ian. This has been, for me personally, really, really enlightening, and a very important topic that I think needs to be discussed, and definitely is a huge part of why I was interested in doing this podcast. But, you know, talking with someone like you who has had the experience and seen everything firsthand, you have such a wonderful perspective. And I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to share that with us.
Well, I'd like to say thank you very much to both of you for inviting me on to the show, and also, you know, for the. I'm a cynical journalist, so I'm stumbling with my words here. But for the work that you do as well,
Thank you.
You know, because it's easy to be defeatist, and it's easy to sort of just, I guess, turn your back on you know, given what it is that you have been through and your family has been through, to just chip away at this. You know, I think that can, more, like I said earlier, more power to your elbow.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think, you know, if we're in a position to be able to help, that we have an obligation to.
Right.
So
that's great.
Well, it's been a joy talking with you. Thank you so much, Ian.
Yes, thank you.
Enjoy your afternoon or your evening in Buffalo, and your afternoon and evening in lovely Southern California.
Thank you, and happy belated birthday. You just had a big birthday.
Thank you very much. 50 last week. Who would have
Yes, you joined the 50 club. I turned 50 last year. I'm there.
Okay. Well, I'm in good company. With love from a chilly London.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful night, Ian.
You too. Thank you very much, both of you.
Bye-bye.
Well, Kelly, you did it again. What some amazing stories coming from me. And I guess I didn't really know exactly what to expect. I did a little bit of research when you told me about having him come on as a guest, but really some great stories and some real interesting insight on the music business and kind of some of the things going on around the music business.
Definitely. I'm so excited to read his book, and I'm going to have to wait a year for it, but I'm definitely looking forward to that. Again, that's called Bodies, Life and Death in the Music Industry. So we'll keep an eye out for that. That's going to be a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really cool getting to all the different individuals that we've had on the show, and just to kind of hear everyone's story and
Mm.
everyone's experience. I'm still so lucky. I tell people all the time I'm just the first listener, and today I just had a great time listening to those stories. It really was great, and just so you guys all remember, the reason why we bring these stories to you and these amazing guests is because the Knoll Family Foundation is raising money to get Bradley's house up and built. And realistically, it's just a way to help others. And you guys can take part in that. And Kelly, anybody that's listening, if they want to donate a couple bucks or maybe pick up a Bradley's house hat or t-shirt, how can they help?
They can check us out at theknowellfamilyfoundation.org. We've got a donate button there. We've got a link for all of our merchandise. We also have Cash App. We're Knoll Family on Cash App. We're Knoll Foundation on Venmo. And through PayPal, they can send donations to info@theknowellfamilyfoundation.org.
Absolutely, guys. Every little bit helps. Working hard to get the funds raised to get this house up and built so we can start helping people. And I say it all the time. You guys can have your little piece of the sublime story still in getting this house opened in Bradley's honor. Kelly, a lot of fun with Ian on the show, and that I'm just a sucker for that British accent. I could listen to those to that all day long. So in honor of that, how are we going to close out this show?
We're going to close out the show with a song from the wonderful compilation that our good friends at Law Records made called The House That Bradley Built. We have a track on there from a band from the UK that I absolutely love, have seen them at least half a dozen times in concert, and actually at one of their shows, that was my oldest son's first mosh pit. The band is the Skints, and they did a phenomenal cover of Get Ready.
Guys, I hope you enjoy it. You can check out all of the songs on YouTube at the Bradley's House page, as well as all of our episodes in the archives. Check out past guests and past interviews that we've done. But for now, I'm Jarett Orr. She's Kelly Nowell, and you guys don't have to go home, but it's time to leave Bradley's house.
Hi, this is Brindy from the Knoll Family Foundation. Many people struggle with addiction. Here is a personal story from someone in recovery. We hope you'll be encouraged as they share their experience, strength, and hope.
So I'll start off the same. I'm Amanda. I'm an alcoholic, and my sobriety date is June 23rd, 2019. I currently today have 657 days sober, one day at a time. I, God willing, will hopefully have 2 years coming up in June in a couple months. And I'm just incredibly dumbfounded and grateful by the life I have in sobriety. I was raised in a good family and a good home, and pretty much had we were upper middle class, and I went to a parochial Catholic school, and like I said, had a very wholesome upbringing, and was always told I had so much potential. And that all kind of went out the window in high school when I started smoking pot and enjoyed the life of feeling good and finding the next way to party instead of, focusing on school and getting into a good college. And, I got married early and had my first child by the age of 22, and tried the family married life for a little while. And by 25, I was separated from my husband and had partial custody of my then 2-year-old, and was doing cocaine, smoking crack cocaine, and partying like a rock star at any day I didn't have my 2-year-old. And it was just wild. And I got sober for the first time December 17th of 2007. I remember I actually went into a treatment center on Christmas Day. And in order to to keep myself accountable to staying sober, I signed over custody of my 2-year-old to my husband that I was separated from at the time until I completed 90 days of treatment. And I did that treatment. I actually didn't even get to stay. I got kicked out a week after I got there for fraternizing. And I stayed sober. I didn't get to stay in treatment. I ended up going into a sober living home and worked diligently with my sponsor and did the steps and immersed myself in AA, and it was great. I got about 1.5 years sober. I ended up getting back together with my husband, got the promises of the program very quickly, felt like I got my life back. And my husband and I moved to Utah, and I made the mistake of thinking that I was cured, that my problem had been substances, and as long as I stayed away from that, I'd be okay. And I started drinking recreationally again. And we did okay in Utah. Well, kind of. I ended up having my second daughter there, and I was able to manage my drinking while we were in Utah, but my husband was not. And we ended up separating permanently December 2nd of 2011 due to his alcoholism. We had both been heavy drinkers for most of our relationship, other than that 1.5 years I was sober. And anyway, we separated because he couldn't stop drinking, and I was managing my drinking okay. And I came back to California and started being a single mom with my 2 girls. And on paper, I managed my life okay. I was able to maintain a job. I decided to go back to school, and I had worked in restaurants for almost 20 years and decided to go back. And first I got my bachelor's in human services and then my master's in counseling. And during that time period, my drinking just slowly got worse and worse and became something that was a necessary part of my everyday life. And during that time period, my ex-husband was not able to stop drinking. And unfortunately, he passed away from alcoholism in July of 2017, before the age of 42. Drank himself to death and passed away from having esophageal varices. And you would have thought that watching him go through that process and watching what it did to my girls would have been enough for me to stop, and it wasn't. I used alcohol as a coping mechanism for the grief I had over the loss of my children's father, and it was just, it really spun actually out of control, I think, more after he passed away than ever before. And I was in a graduate program trying to get my master's in counseling, and I couldn't even start a day without a shot of vodka. Like literally, I had to make sure I had 2 shots of vodka because I needed to take a shot to kind of get my system going, and I'd usually throw up the first one and need a second one to start feeling okay, and then I could function. And I don't know how I managed to do what I was doing. I was just in go mode. But I can tell you, when I walked in my graduation ceremony in May of 2019 with a master's in counseling, I felt like the biggest fraud ever. I was like, what in the heck am I doing here? I just got all of this education under my belt to be able to go counsel people on how to become better people or live better lives or work through their trauma. And I'm sitting here drinking, a minimum of a fifth to gosh knows how much vodka a day. I mean, like I said, I couldn't even start my morning without it. And I just decided that something needed to change. I have a dear friend from high school who was getting a year sober, and she invited me to come to a women's meeting to see her get her chip in April. And that was kind of when I started to admit that I had a problem, and that even though I wasn't doing substances the way I had in my 20s, that I really wasn't managing life well. And I went to that women's meeting, not every week, but pretty consistently between April and June. And they had this thing where they'd go around the table and and introduce themselves as an alcoholic and give their sobriety date. And I remember it would get to me, and I couldn't even say today because I would have already taken a shot that morning just to be able to get to the meeting. And I don't know, by the second week of June, third week of June, they finally kind of got me to open up and talk and just said, let us know what's going on with you. Like, where are you at? And it was the first time that I was able to say out loud that I wasn't okay. And I started crying in that meeting, and I just said, I don't know how to change anything yet, but I just know that I'm not okay. And there was a woman that chased me out of that meeting. I did not know her at the time. And she gave me her number, and she said, what worked for me was to pray for surrender. And it sounded kind of profound to me, even though it seemed really simple. And sure enough, the next day, that same woman who I did not know sent me a text and just said, thinking of you. And I was blown away that this woman I did not know had taken the time to send me a text and let me know that she was thinking of me when I had shared that I wasn't okay the day before. And I did what she had suggested. I prayed for surrender, and I called her and I said, I want to stop drinking, and I don't know how. And she helped me figure it out. Like I said, I'm a single mom with 2 girls, and it wasn't an option for me to go into a medical detox or a treatment center. And she helped me figure out how I could detox from home somewhat safely. And that dear friend of mine who had gotten a year sober in April is an LVN, and she was able to check on me frequently and check my blood pressure. And I detoxed from home. I actually haven't had a drink since June 20th, but my sobriety date's June 23rd because I did smoke some pot to get through my withdrawal symptoms. And that woman that told me to pray for surrender and help me figure out how to detox sponsored me and continues to sponsor me in my recovery. And I am just beyond grateful and blessed that I have not had to have a drink or take a drug since June 23rd, 2019. And my journey in recovery has been just incredible. There were women from that meeting, Brindy included, who were calling to check on me that first week to make sure I had everything I needed. Did I need Gatorade or crackers? And picking me up to take me to meetings. Because even though I had a car and a license, I was not feeling like driving to a meeting during that. And I was surrounded by so much love and support and encouragement. I don't think I'll ever forget that. It was, it made me know I was doing the right thing and that I didn't have to do it alone. And I can honestly say that since the day I chose to get sober, I have not had to walk through anything in my life alone, even as a single mom. There's always been women and people in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous to walk me through whatever it is I'm going through. And, I had walked in a graduation ceremony for my master's program in May before I got sober, but I hadn't finished my final project. And it took me a while. It took me almost 9 months to finish that final thesis in my master's program. And my degree didn't post until May of 2020. But I did it. I got it done. I spent a lot of time in my early sobriety just in the big book, working my steps, started going to that 6 a.m. meeting every day, and found out that I really enjoyed starting my day that way. It gave me an opportunity to kind of get right-sized and get my head right to start off the day. It allowed me to see other Alcoholics Anonymous that were doing the deal and to grow in my fellowship and, stay close to the pack, get to know other women. And I also liked that it didn't interfere with my time with my kids. I had been that mom that was there to make sure that they ate and got to school and had a lunch packed, but I definitely hadn't been present for them. And so doing the 6 a.m. meeting every day allowed me to be home to get them ready for school and be home and present with them more in the afternoons and evenings. And I really enjoyed that. And it's part of my routine today. I still get up and do the 6 a.m. meetings in the morning. And I just can't say enough about how much my life is different. I get to work out in the field now as a therapist. I work with individuals at a mental health facility in Orange County during the day, which I absolutely love. It's higher acuity patients that need a lot of help, and I love being able to serve them and work with them with the training that I got in my program. in my master's program, and I see clients through private practice in the evenings and weekends, and I try to stay active and involved in Alcoholics Anonymous and be of service where I can in that area of my life. And I the relationship I have with my girls and my children and my family today is night and day from what it was before I got sober. You know, I have a 16-year-old she's a great kid, but she's got her own struggles, and I finally have been able to let go of trying to control her path and just build a relationship with her where when stuff's not going right or she's having issues, she actually comes and talks to me. And that is like one of the greatest gifts of sobriety I could ever ask for. To have my teenage daughter know that she can come talk to me, and you know, yeah, I get upset about stuff, but she's not judged. She's accepted and loved for who she is, and that is a gift of the program. You know, I can't say enough about, like I said, the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and the program and the design for living that it's provided me. I shared recently with my family that, you know, I finally feel like I've been given the tools to live up to the potential that I've always been told I have. And that feels like a gift from God that I can't describe how grateful I am for. And, you know, I had another friend that just asked the other day, like, do you plan on never drinking again? And I just said, you know, I don't want to jinx anything, but I do know for a fact that my life is a million times better without drugs and alcohol. And I have no plans whatsoever of ever returning to that life, because it was miserable. I don't ever want to go back to feeling like a fraud and an imposter and feeling like I lived that double life. I was full of self-loathing and hatred of myself, and I could barely look in the mirror. I remember I would brush my teeth in the kitchen so I didn't have to look in the mirror. And today I somewhat like who I am, and I'm still a work in progress and still have areas to work on and improve. But I have a way of doing that, and I have a God in my life that I can turn over to and let him be in charge of the results, and I can just focus on the task that's in front of me to do and stay focused on the next indicated step and leave the results to God. And that's a gift to the program that I can't say enough about as well.
Some folks say that smoking herb is a crime. If they catch you smoking, they're bound to drop the dime. Insufferable, informer, crazy fools wait with their fingers crossed for you to break the rules. And in the evening, yeah, we try to jam. We like the music loud in this here band. We let the bass line drop as loud as we can stand. Somebody always gotta turn informer for the man. I wanna know right now, is there one of you in the crowd? Are you gonna call 911 and spoil all my fun? You crazy fool. I'm in the mood. Get ready. I'm in the mood. Come on now, yeah. I'm in the mood. Are you ready? I'm in the mood. Come on now, yeah. Come on. Load up the ball, crank up the song. Let the informer call 911. Load up the ball, crank up the song. Let the informer call 911. And when security police force wanna run, don't try to run, don't try to hide, just pull out the knife, pop in the clip, and let one slip into these crazy smoking herb is a crime. If they catch you smoking, they're bound to drop the dime. Insufferable, informer, crazy fools wait with their fingers crossed for you to break the rules. Well, I'm in the mood. Get ready. I'm in the mood. Come on now, yeah. I'm in the mood. Are you ready? I'm in the mood. Come on now.